Welcome to Content with Character, the weekly podcast that'll give you the momentum you need to create content with more ease, clarity, and laughter. I'm your host, content copywriter Emily Aborn, and I'm all about unconventional marketing approaches. I believe in your big ideas, and I'm excited to help you share them in a way that's distinctly you. I often hear business owners who have a desire to get more visibility through podcast guesting and speaking. These opportunities tend to not just magically happen or happen overnight. And while they can feel overwhelming at first, there's a lot to consider, but it's well worth seeing if it's a good next step for you to increase your visibility. This episode will make the whole pitching concept actionable and give you some key things to remember when reaching out to potential collaborators. Hi, welcome back to Content with Character. I am just coming back inside after our first official sunny day here in New Hampshire in what feels like a month. It was also my first official swim in a local pond or lake, and it's also Friday as I'm recording this episode. And in general, this is just one of those topics that fires me up in all sorts of ways. Ask any of my friends. So I'm all sorts of jazzed and pizzazzed today for this episode. I'm both sorry and also you're welcome. All right. I want to start off today by telling you a little story. This episode is going to be full of a lot of examples, a lot of these little kind of anecdotes, a compilation, if you will. So watch out, get ready for more stories, but let's start with a short one. When I first started this Content with Character podcast back in, May already. Look at us go. Here we go. When I first started in May, I shared a post to my Instagram stories that had it was like the cover art and a link to listen. I was just really, really excited about getting my big news out. I was super grateful for all the people who helped to share and spread the word about my podcast. I was really, really excited about this new show because I am just very, very grateful and excited to have it in the first place, and grateful and excited to have you here. So anyway, in my excitement, as I was celebrating in my stories, in response, I got a DM on Instagram along the lines of, "Oh, hey, nice cover art. I like it. If you're ever looking for a guest, I would love to be one. Hand raised." And I will say I was a little bit appalled. I do expect cold pitches from people who are not really part of my world. They don't know me. They don't know what my show is about. They're unaware. They don't know that I don't have guests on my show. They may not know that I will never have guests on my show, most likely. I have another podcast for that, which I'll get to in a minute. But this was from somebody who is actually following me, and I am actually connected to them. I've met them in person. We don't really talk or engage on each other's content at all on a regular basis, but it's a human, okay? So I expect the cold pitches from, the bots, the people who are salesy. I get that. But this is it wasn't expected. Anyway, it felt a little bit rude. Honestly, to cold pitch me as somebody that knows me, has met me, and to some extent, it just felt like they were not paying attention. They didn't care. And I was in the middle of celebrating. It was really just about celebrating, and they turned the attention right back to themselves. So it was this story layered upon many, 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 many other experiences in both the guest seat, which I will totally get into on another episode, and the host seat, which have led me to putting together this episode for you today. It was the straw that broke Emily's back, if you will. Okay, so here's where we're going, just so you know where I'm taking you. We're going to talk about podcast and speaking, to some extent, pitching and guesting. We're going to talk about why you might want to do it, how it can really help your business, how it helps increase your visibility, how it helps you as a business owner with your message, and honestly, I think your personal growth. And then I'm going to give you a few high-level do's, and we'll toss in those do's a few don'ts, and then one major don't at the end. I'll also give you a lot of resources that I've compiled, a lot of resources I use for accessing speaking opportunities, accessing podcast guesting. So a lot of those things are going to be in the show notes, and I might have one more resource on that for you soon. I'm kind of testing the waters on something, so Stay tuned for that. This is the first of what I would imagine is going to be more episodes like this one, because I believe so strongly in collaborations. And I do believe that podcasting, speaking, that is a form of collaboration. So being a better collaborator, no matter what side of the mic you're on and what you're collaborating on, is really, really important to me. So that's where we're going. And real quick about me, if you don't know about me yet, or you kind of know about me, but not really, I'm Emily Aborn. I'm a content copywriter, and I proudly just added the 94th industry that I have written for to my list a couple weeks ago. Yes, I have a list for literally everything, and if it's not a list, it's a spreadsheet. In addition to being the podcast host of this podcast, Content with Character, I'm also the host of the She Built This podcast. And I've been building unofficial businesses since I was a kid. Entrepreneurship is in my DNA, and I officially stepped away from my last job in 2014, have not looked back since. Well, maybe once or twice, but mostly I just absolutely love working for myself and being an entrepreneur. If you want to learn more about me than you probably ever wanted to know, and how I help other entrepreneurs, you can go to emilyaborn.com, where I share what I think is a very thorough and educational blog on lots of the topics I cover in this podcast and a whole lot more. Okay, that is enough about me. That's not why you're here. Let's talk guesting. So you heard me just tell you that I've been an entrepreneur at heart since I was a little kid. I mean, I'm talking, I wrote my own newspaper. I did the whole lemonade stand thing once or twice, or maybe 3 times, obviously. Sold railroad spikes at my very own, let's call it antique stand. I did circus performances for the neighbors, aka trampoline routines, and like put it on as a show for them. And I've also had podcasting in my blood since I was a little kid, like before it even existed, before we even knew it was a thing. My mom and her best friend, Sharon, who we lived with when I was little, they used to record me and my friend Naomi talking and singing onto cassette tapes. And when I got older, my brother Peter and I would record like our own little radio programs on cassette too. I was obsessed with cassette recordings. Like I loved recording things. And it's funny because my senior project in high school, I actually ended up doing a project where I interviewed and recorded like 20 different parents on cassette tape, of course, to help me answer my thesis question. That was like part of my project. In 2008, I worked for a chiropractor, and I got to actually be her co-host a couple of times on a real podcast. And then in 2016, I started doing radio and podcast interviews for my business. Now, I think that for some people, you just feel really, really drawn to this kind of medium. Like there are some people for whom I think that the medium of podcasting it's just a really, really good fit. It just feels right. Feels like you've come home, and it has almost like this magnetic lure. Like that is how I feel. I felt similarly about speaking and giving workshops and teaching. I went to school actually for health education for the very reason that I wanted to teach health ed to organizations and students and work with people one-on-one. So that said, even though I've always been really drawn to these things, drawn to these formats, getting confident as a speaker and podcaster definitely took a lot of time, and it took a lot of practice, and it took more practice and more practice. And so while I loved it, I knew I was drawn to it. I knew it's what I wanted to do. Actually doing it well, or I guess I should really say better, it took a really long time. I have been on tons of podcasts, like quite a few. And I love being a podcast guest. I love being a guest speaker and teaching a workshop or providing an organization with a training that will really help their people. And as a business owner, I see that there are also, in addition to me just loving it, like there are also tons of benefits in being a speaker and also in being a podcast guest. So today I'm going to focus primarily on guesting as a podcast guest. Some of this will cross over into being a guest speaker too, because some of the collaboration looks the same. But today I want to focus on being a podcast guest and just how to make that even better, how to be a better guest. Here's what I see as benefits to you as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, in being a speaker or in being a podcast guest. Number one, you get to meet other business owners and professionals who are like-minded and probably talking to a lot of the same kind of people you are. And I always say, you never know where a conversation's going to take you. You never know where a quality collaboration can take you or where the next opportunity can take you. So making these kind of connections already, boom, priceless. Number two, you get your message and your face out to new people. So suddenly you're able to extend beyond just the people who already know you, already like you, already trust you. You're now going further and farther and spreading your message wider. Number three, you have a resource. So when you do a podcast guest interview, or sometimes in the case of a workshop, you'll get a replay, you have a resource that you now can share with clients or colleagues when they ask you a question about something that you answer in that workshop or on that podcast. Number four, you can repurpose the content. We will talk about that another time, but that is a super, super, super benefit of being a guest on other people's podcasts. Number five, or speaking. Number five, a lot of these opportunities will give you a chance to increase the awareness about what you're working on, your book, your podcast, your event, your group program, et cetera, et cetera. It depends on the opportunity, but a lot of them give you a chance to share a call to action. Number six, I love that podcasting and speaking give you credibility. They show you as an expert, as a knowledgeable resource. And here is a big one, and it is sometimes overlooked. As you do this, as you practice, as you podcast guest more and speak more, you will start to refine your message. You learn your message more. You answer questions more easily and more readily, and you get a better sense of what others are struggling with, feeling, encountering, who are in many cases the exact kind of person that you're trying to help. So there's tons of benefits. I mean, I came up with 7, but I'm sure that there are way, way more that I'm not even thinking of or mentioning. I consider being a guest on someone's podcast or being a speaker in their group or organization a huge honor, a huge gift. I do not take it lightly. This is not just another event in my calendar. I believe that it is a collaborative effort. They are giving you access to their platform and they're bringing your brilliant brain and your expertise to their people. Win, win, win. Everybody wins. It's like Oprah here. Everybody wins. As host of 2 podcasts, this one and the She Built This podcast, as well as being a leader of the She Built This community, trust me, lots of people want to give workshops and presentations in front of my group. And I have been dished up a heaping lot of interesting pitches, if you will. We're going to call them pitches. And so for those of you who are not familiar with the word pitch, pitching is basically just when you have to reach out to a host or whoever is in charge and be like, hey, I would like this opportunity. Here's what I can bring to the table. Can I have the opportunity? But as you'll hear, I don't recommend you just go ahead and throw it all out there like that. I have some ideas for you that can help make your quote unquote pitch, if you will, a little bit better. And I might like to redefine the word pitch because I don't really know. It doesn't sit well with me. I don't know what it should be, but maybe it's just an invitation to collaborate or some ideas on how to collaborate. I don't know. That even kind of sounds a little bit shicey too as I'm working it out, but it's just really pitching is what I'm always talking about. It's making a connection. Okay. It's just reaching out to someone as a human. You are reaching out to another human. That's it. So that's pitching. Pitching is a conversation. I don't know how many times I'm going to just call every single visibility effort a two-way street, a two-way conversation, a bridge. So you're really just looking to make a connection with another human. You're not pitching something. You're not chucking something at them, right? All right, so let me roll my soapbox away about pitching. Let's start with some high-level do's, and then as I go, we'll kind of get into some of the don'ts, but then I have one don't at the end. So my first do is do spend time looking into the host and the show a little bit. Do they even have guests on their show? So if that person had asked me, do you have guests on your show? I would have said no, and they would have right then known not to pitch me. This is super, super easy in most cases to do. Okay. So you go to their podcast feed. It just happened to me the other day where someone reached out to me and actually she asked to be on the She Built This podcast. And I did say yes to her because it came through a connection. Somebody actually connected me to her. But I went to go look on her podcast to see if I would make a good fit for her show as well and say, well, hey, maybe we could do a podcast swap. Maybe we could do an exchange. It was very clear to me very, very fast. She doesn't have guests on her show. So me asking to be a guest on her show, that's a no-go. Secondly, just like look into, okay, is there area in their content, is there an area in their content where you could fill a little bit of a gap in for them? So kind of listening to their message as a whole, is there something that they do talk about, but they don't really talk about it from your angle, or you have a unique perspective on it? And then some other questions I would really invite you to consider is like, if you listen to their show, do you think that the two of you will jive? Because I think that that rapport with one another as a podcast guest and a podcast host is a lovely thing. Like, do you think you two are going to be able to have a good conversation? Do you think you two will be able to jive? Maybe even listen to how they do their interviews with their guests and see if there's like a natural flow to it or if it's a little bit choppy. Like, check it out. See if you guys would be a good fit. Maybe there's something really fun that they share about themselves in an episode that would make a nice little jumping off point for you to connect in. Okay. I mean, all you really have to do is listen to 1 or 2 episodes of their show and it will give you a really, really good idea. And sometimes it only needs to be like 10 to 15 minutes of the show to give you a really, really good idea. I went back into my pitch graveyard, I call it, aka the pitches that will never turn into episodes, and I pulled out some good and also not so good examples of this. So here's number 1. Dear Emily, I hope you are doing amazing. I'm reaching out to you to share a client of mine who I think would be a great guest on your podcast if you're open to it. It's interesting emoji here. I absolutely loved your episode on Enneagram, business, and you, and I feel that so-and-so is fully aligned with you, fully aligned with me, okay? Okay, and I doubt, I mean, it's possible, but I doubt that this person actually listened to that episode because, first of all, I can tell that she cut and pasted the exact title. And I know it's the exact title because I used an Oxford comma in that title. And that is the one spot in her entire email that has an Oxford comma. And the rest of the email all has ampersands. It would strike me weird. I'm not saying that it's not possible, but it would strike me weird if a person uses ampersands as an and then randomly decided to do an and with an Oxford comma. I mean, weirder things have happened, but that's just like one little thing I noticed. But the real reason I don't think she listened, the real reason I do not think she listened to that specific episode that she specifically pulled out is because her guest suggestion, who is supposedly fully aligned with me, pitched me on 5 ways to inspire your kids while working full-time. And she had a couple topics as well, a few other topics. Like one was not hiding behind emails in a recession-induced panic, which is interesting to me in and of itself. We'll get to that in a bit. But I don't know. It just didn't actually really feel fully aligned. And that was the only sentence she said about my actual podcast. I don't think she took time to learn about what the She Built This podcast even was, who my audience was, what the show was for. Also, she did not use my submission form. And probably my biggest pet peeve is when a podcaster has explicitly put on their podcast page how to pitch to be on their show, which I do, and you have to use a form. It says all pitches must be submitted through this form to be considered. People don't use the form, and that drives me nuts. So here's a tip. If you are pitching to Speaking Opportunities podcast, look for that first. If you happen to miss it, it's fine. Like this does happen. I kind of hide mine a little bit. So I don't write it off completely when somebody emails me versus filling out the form, but it is a little bit of a pet peeve. It's kind of annoying. And the people that fill out that form, those are the ones that always stand out to me. In some instances, I will respond to somebody's email that email pitches me and tell them that they have to fill out the form. And in like 85% of cases, people don't go that extra step to fill out the form. And that's fine. But those are the ones that always stand out to me. They take 2 seconds, actually figure out what your instructions are and how to follow them. Okay. Now a do on this. I kind of like woven a don't there, if you can see. So this is a woman I would actually like to have on my She Built This podcast someday soon when I have openings again in my content calendar. She wrote me this. I recently came across your podcast, and as a fellow introvert, I loved your episode with Jen Jones. You both gave great tips on navigating entrepreneurship through an introverted lens, and I especially appreciate your strategies on networking, making the ask for referrals, and collaborating with complementary businesses to grow your list and influence. Hello. She clearly listened to that episode. Like, I feel like that woman could have written the show notes for me. She probably did a better job writing those show notes than I did. So that's like my first tip. It's really, really easy. When you make your ask or make your pitch, put some time and thought into doing your research first. Check out the host. Check out a few episodes. It doesn't take much. It does not take much to go the extra mile because most pitches, between you and me, they're going all of 5 feet. So you going the extra mile is just going to absolutely make your pitch sing. Mass emailing your pitch, probably not the best way to do it. I don't know. I'm sure it works for some people, but in the podcasting world, they have a term for this. It's called spray and pray. And I say spray, pray, and I run. As a podcast host, I can almost always spot those kind of pitches, and I say, turn around, Emily, just turn around. Okay, tip number 2. This is actually a good exercise for you. Like, even if you're not pitching, I feel like this is a great exercise for you for your content in general. And that is to keep your topic suggestions specific and concise. So, as a podcast host, I love options, but I don't like too many options when it comes to what topics somebody wants to come on my show and share about. I would say 3 to 5 for me. I'm only speaking for myself. That is like a nice sweet spot, and I'll tell you why. If someone pitches me and says, I can talk about anything entrepreneurship, I have no idea what that means. Like, I have no idea what questions to ask them. My mind is like, so could I think. Like, I just draw a total blank as a host. And I've seen things like that, like my entrepreneurship journey, goal setting, mindset. Like, these are very, very broad topics and very, very generic. What I love about a specific, concise idea for a topic is that so often it makes me say, I have never considered that before. I wonder what that's all about. I wonder what that perspective looks like. And recently I got one actually for the She Built This podcast, which the woman had sent me a pitch that included that she wanted to talk about 7 types of rest. And I was like, oh, okay, now that is interesting. In addition, when you open it up with kind of like those 3 to 5 options, it's like if I had already done my content calendar and what she was pitching me just totally did not fit, chances are high that in that 3 to 5 options, there's going to be something that is a good fit. So a really good practice for us as business owners looking to increase our visibility in either speaking or podcast guesting is to sit down and brainstorm like 10 things you can talk about, 10 presentations you would love to talk about easily. Bonus points if you come up with like cool, catchy titles that others might not be using to talk about similar topics. So instead of just the broad general term of mindset, what if it was like the 3 ways your brain is making your life harder and what to do about it? So when you go in to make your ask, you're actually going to be pulling from that list of 10 things, and you just pick 3 to 5 of them that are relevant for this specific podcast, this specific organization host, or conversely, maybe it's something that you're focusing right now on your business and you would want to focus on a specific topic for the reason that that's what you're focusing on in your business. So then you can offer those. Sometimes along with this, I even will offer sample questions or bullet points. A few that I like to provide people with for my own topics are 4 out-of-the-box ways to increase your visibility and connect to new audiences. How to create consistent content with ease, how to use the power of curiosity in your marketing. And then I will break those down with like 3 bullet points under each one, or potential questions you could ask me under each one. And I've had so many hosts that I go on their show and they ask me a question. I'm like, oh my God, that was such a good question. They're like, yeah, you sent us that question, which it's so helpful because it's on my tongue. It's at the ready when they're asking me the questions. I wasn't tooting my own horn about writing a good question. I just forget what questions I send them. So I actually was calling myself out on being forgetful. Anyway, this said, I have like about 10 things written down that I would offer up and share depending on who I was chatting with and who the audience was. I would give them like 3 to 5 options depending on who they are. The other thing I love about doing this activity, sitting down and brainstorming this for yourself, is that it really helps you to refine what you're talking about and what you really think about it. And as you repeat kind of like a similar message and you get known for similar topics, you become known for this particular thing and in this particular area. So it gets super fun because then you are the person in that area. You are the expert. So I see it as like a win, win, win. You're making their life easy. You're becoming known for what you want to be known for. And you're offering really, really high value in that area because you know your stuff. Okay. Last do for the day. Do number 3. Do be a good guest. Be the kind of person podcasters tell their other friend podcasters about as being a good guest. How do I do that, Emily? You show up prepared. You show up ready to give value, which I'll get to that in just 1 second. You show up on time. You show up with a quality microphone in a quiet place without your dog like making noises on your lap, headphones, whatever they ask you to do. Do what they ask you to do. That's how you be a good guest. And also help share the episode when it comes out. Like that is hugely valuable for a podcaster. Getting their name in front of your audience is just as important as you getting your name in front of theirs. I have had a few pro guest sharers. One of my top guest sharers, I think it was Mignon Fogarty, the grammar girl. Mignon was on my show. She used the right Zoom link. She replied to my preparation emails. She showed up extremely prepared, extremely ready, headset, mic. She offered amazing value to my listeners. And then she shared the socks off my episode. Podcasts love guests who help them spread the word. Now, Mignon is like big time. Okay, she's hot to trot. So you can imagine how big of a deal this was for me as a podcaster. And not only did she share, she wrote an entire article about her experience on my show and how easy I made it for her to share. I was like super, super blown away. I did include that in the show notes in case you want to read it and see what she said. But do you know how fast I would say yes if Mignon asked to be a guest on my show again? I would say yes in about 2 seconds, probably 1 second. Okay. So the moral of the story is a really great way to be a really great guest is just to help share the episode that you're on when it comes out. Okay. And when I'm talking about adding value as a guest, boy, I had a guest on once. I definitely won't mention any names, but they'd written a book with a little 5-part, let's call it a framework in it. Okay. And I'd sent them the questions ahead of time and they didn't reply. So they knew the direction, but they didn't like say, oh, we need to change this. So I was just going into the interview with the fact that these questions were the ones I was going to ask. And in my interview, I asked them to share the pieces of the 5-part little framework. And while we were recording, they said, oh no, we can only share 2 because otherwise no one would read the book. So obviously I edited that part out. But here's the thing. I know we make money with our information, expertise, books, words, coaching. We charge money for our paid workshops, our one-to-one services, and I'm also a big believer that you can actually probably spoon feed people a lot of what you know, a lot of your framework. Give them tastes of it, bite by bite, and they will still buy your book. They will still pay to work with you. They will take your workshop. They will hire you one-to-one. Why do I think this? Well, I've literally written a blog and done a podcast on like every single piece of information I know. Not quite. But I still work with people all the time who either just want me to do it for them, or they're never going to read my podcast, listen to my blog, or they want individualized support. They have more questions. This is just my own personal belief, but I don't think I'm alone in it because a lot of writers I listen to go on podcasts, go on shows, give away the farm that is in their book. And guess what? I still go read their book. I did not get everything I needed from the episode. I still read their book. I want to experience it for myself. I want to work through the material for myself. I want to take it a little bit slower than that 20-minute episode they tried to jam pack everything into. So just off the top of my head, I can think of the book FOMO. I can think of Kendra Hall's Stories That Stick. These are both books I heard on a podcast, and I went and bought the book from the actual podcast, even though they shared pretty much everything that was in the book. So I will stop hammering this point home, but I do want to encourage you. Don't be afraid to really show up and like provide value to the listener. Like that is a way to be an amazing guest. Don't skirt around topics and issues. If the host is giving you an opportunity to go deep on something, go deep. Take that invitation and go for it. One thing I don't think we always think of is that skirting around topics or kind of giving like loose answers, that can actually bite you in the butt because people might listen and think like, oh, they have no idea what they're talking about. Now, you can always caveat your answers by saying, there's more on this in my book, or we really deep dive into this in my course or program. This is just a little taste of this thing. When you work with me one-to-one, we're going to get really into it specifically for you as an individual. You get the idea, but don't be stingy because being a good collaborator is really about that give mentality. And that is just kind of all I'm saying here. So that was number 3. So my do's are, let's sum up the do's. Do number 1, do take a beat and figure out who you're pitching. Personalize the pitch, follow the instructions they have, if any, on what they want from you as a guest on their show. Number 2, be specific with the topics that you're presenting. And number 3, be a good guest. And lastly, here's my don't. Don't be afraid of no. I think of it like this. If you're getting no's, you're at least asking, right? And a no is not always necessarily a no forever. I'm thinking of a recent guest I had named Amanda McKinney, who I actually originally turned down because I said, oh, sorry, I don't have room in my podcasting schedule. It was true. But we exchanged actually a couple emails back and forth. I listened to her podcast and she's like, yes, I totally get it. And it turned out that it actually felt like it was going to make a really, really good fit. So I moved a few things around and got her on right away. And I have done the same thing on pitching to other people's shows where it's just not the right time, or they don't reply because your email got like lost in the bottom of their inbox or something. So I think like I have 3 examples this year from pitching to podcast hosts that didn't have room. I also pitched as a speaker to be in the main conference for women, which they said no, they were full. And I've decided, you know what, if I'm not speaking at it, I'm at least going to attend and see what they might be looking for so I can improve on that ask next year. And then I have a few other podcasters who I've reached out to and they haven't even replied to my email, or they replied saying my email got lost and then I wrote them back and they never replied again. Like it's okay. If we're not getting no's or some crickets, then we're not asking. As a podcast guest, I do tend to try to reply. Like, even if people don't pitch me correctly, like even if they don't use the form, I always try to reply, even if I'm never going to have them on. But I will say I'm pretty sure I'm in the minority with that. I do not think a lot of people will reply to you. And they might just say no. But a lot of times you don't even get to know if it's a yay or nay. But what I want to encourage you in is it's okay. Don't be afraid of no. Don't be afraid of crickets or silence. Keep on going. I recently was on a show with a woman I met through another podcaster. And it ended up being on her show ended up leading to a discovery call with one of her listeners. So she reached out to me and now she's a client. So here's what I want you to remember from that. In many cases, one yes is all you need. and you can celebrate that one yes. Like, you don't need to be on thousands of podcasts and have thousands of speaking engagements. It's so often the case that just one yes is all you need. Okay. And the other thing I love about this is like really viewing it as like a networking. I don't like that word so much, but it's really like an opportunity to build relationships and create collaborations and friendships. Like, it is so amazing that the way you grow your network, the way you expand your relationship building as you do this, because I mean, just speaking from personal experience, I have 2 really amazing friends in my life, all because of asking to be a guest on their podcast, all because of podcast guesting. Now they are like my friends. It's amazing what can happen. So don't be afraid of the no. Keep going. Keep trying. The next door will open where that window shuts, or vice versa. I'm not sure how it goes. To quickly wrap up, it is resource time. I have a few blogs I'm going to include in the show notes for you. I definitely want to give you that one that Mignon Fogarty wrote about being my guest so that you can read it. I also wrote one about keys to podcast guesting, which I did based on a conversation I had with Alicia Galati and Lisa Zaratny on guesting and hosting. And then you'll also find links to that episode we did, a podcast interview with Angie Trueblood of the Go Pitch Yourself podcast, a link to a podcast guest collaboration group I'm a part of. I love that group, and I have gotten I've made a lot of connections in that group and actually presented myself to be a guest on quite a few podcasts through that group. So I'll make sure there's a link to the podcast guest collab group. You can make lots of new connections in there, and you could get an opportunity to pitch yourself. I also wanted to give you my podcast pitching guide. This is absolutely free. 0 opt-in. You can just find it in the show notes, and it's a nice PDF. Like, it's very thorough, and it will walk you through everything that I talked about in this episode and a couple more things as well. And then lastly, I do want to make sure to share about my upcoming Marketing Momentum Lab. If you're listening to this episode when it's coming out, we're getting ready to kick off another small group in the Marketing Momentum Lab this month, July 2023. The Marketing Momentum Lab, for those of you who don't know, haven't heard me talk about it, it's a 6-week program focused on things like collaborations. And like I said earlier in this episode, this is when I really dive into how this relates to you and your business individually. We talk about connection through your content. We talk about connection with other people. We talk about how to choose your visibility methods so that it works for you, works for your business, works for your life. And this time around in the Marketing Momentum Lab, I'm super excited because I've added a special bonus session, which is very, very hands-on. And I've also given an upgrade option. So if people want to, you can get some extra one-to-one and strategy time with me. You can find out about the Marketing Momentum Lab at the link in the show notes. All of these links will be in the show notes. You can also go to marketingmomentumlab.com. I would love to have you with me this summer. It's like business summer school made super duper, super, super, super fun. And with a little tiny group, all of your own. Okay, that's all for today. I super appreciate you for listening and love that you've been here with me. I'll see you next week. We're going to have a short and fun episode next week on how to spark a little bit more creativity for yourself when the well runs dry. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Content with Character. If you loved the episode, please make sure to subscribe to the podcast, rate, review, and share it with someone else you know it could help. For more content and visibility tips, visit my blog at emilyaborn.com and be sure to connect with me on Instagram at emilyaborn. I'd love to hear how this inspired you to take action.